A biopic just crossed $1 billion at the box office. Not Elvis. Not Bohemian Rhapsody. Not even Oppenheimer. Michael, the Michael Jackson film starring an actor almost nobody had heard of 6 months ago, is now the highest-grossing biography film in the history of cinema. And here's the part that makes this story worth telling. The version you watched in theaters is not the version this movie was supposed to be. There was another ending, a darker one. It was filmed, it was edited, and then it was thrown out for a reason that has almost nothing to do with creative choice and almost everything to do with a lawyer finding a contract nobody remembered existed. Stick with me, because the real story behind Michael is stranger than anything a marketing department could have planned. Let's start with what's easy to verify. Money. Michael opened in April with about $97 million domestically and just over $217 million worldwide, which already broke the opening weekend record for a music biopic, a record previously held by Straight Outta Compton. From there, it just kept climbing. By mid-June, it had passed Bohemian Rhapsody's $911 million haul, making it the highest-grossing music biopic ever made. A couple of weeks after that, it passed Oppenheimer's $975 million, making it the highest-grossing biopic of any kind, about any subject ever released. And then, in July, it crossed $1 billion worldwide. It is currently the only biography film in movie history to do that. For context, this was made on a reported production budget of about $155 million, which means the return on investment here is not just good, it's borderline historic for this genre. It's also now the highest-grossing film Lionsgate has ever released, ahead of The Hunger Games, Catching Fire. So by any commercial measure, this is one of the biggest entertainment stories of the year, which makes the next part genuinely confusing. Critics did not agree with audiences at all. The film landed in the high 30s on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic, both scores translating to roughly the same verdict, generally unfavorable. Audiences said the opposite. CinemaScore gave it an A-. Audience tracking sites put positive response above 90%. That is one of the widest critic-to-audience splits of the entire year for a major studio release. Some critics were genuinely won over. Several trade reviews called it an effective, crowd-pleasing biopic and praised the lead performance specifically. Other outlets were far less kind, with some describing it as a greatest hits reel dressed up as a life story, more interested in recreating iconic performances than telling an actual narrative. Normally, when a gap this wide shows up, it means one of two things. Either critics are missing what a general audience actually wants from this kind of film, or audience love for the subject is strong enough that the filmmaking itself becomes almost secondary. With Michael Jackson specifically, it's probably both. But there's a third explanation that barely anyone outside entertainment trade reporting has actually dug into, and it's the most interesting part of this entire story. Here is the part most coverage gets wrong, or at least oversimplifies. This was not a studio quietly deciding to end the story early because they wanted a safer, sunnier movie. This was a legal emergency. According to reporting from outlets, including Puck, Rolling Stone, and The Hollywood Reporter, the original cut of this film built its entire structure around a 1993 molestation accusation made by a boy named Jordan Chandler, whose family later reached a settlement with Jackson reported at around $20 million. The original script started and ended with that story. The third act reportedly included a dramatized version of the police raid on Neverland Ranch. The problem is that the Chandler settlement from decades earlier apparently included a clause barring any commercial dramatization of that story or that family, ever. And according to multiple reports, nobody working on the film caught this until after principal photography had already wrapped in 2024. The discovery reportedly came to light after a Financial Times investigation surfaced additional settlement payments the Jackson estate had made to other accusers. That reporting is what apparently sent lawyers back through old paperwork, where they found Chandler clause. Producer Graham King later described the moment plainly, saying he found out while on vacation, and called it surreal to finish an entire film only to learn afterward that the studio didn't actually have the legal right to tell the story the way they told it.so. The production went back for reshoots, reportedly around 22 days' worth, rebuilding the entire third act from the ground up. The new ending stops the story during the bad tour era, well before any of the allegations became public. Reported figures on the cost of those reshoots vary depending on the outlet, generally landing somewhere between $10 and $50 million, and the Jackson estate, which co-produced the film, reportedly covered the bill. Director Antoine Fuqua and producer Graham King also reportedly received substantial additional payments tied to completing the reshoot. That is a very different story than a studio played it safe. This was a legal landmine that forced a rewrite under pressure, with the finished cut being less a curated decision and more a forced pivot. It's worth adding some context here, too. The Jackson estate is currently still dealing with a separate legal case from two other accusers, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, whose long-running lawsuit is reportedly scheduled to go to trial later this year. So the timing of this film's release, right in the middle of ongoing litigation, adds another layer to why the studio may have wanted the driest possible legal footing for its ending. The Jackson family itself is not unified on this film, and that split runs right through the household. Michael's son Prince served as an executive producer and was reportedly present on set throughout filming. The estate, run by longtime advisors including attorney John Branca, was deeply involved in shaping the production. But Michael's daughter Paris reportedly saw an early draft and was openly critical, and his other son BG had no involvement at all. On the sibling side, Janet Jackson is not part of this film in any form, and other siblings kept their distance as well. So you have one branch of the family actively building this movie, and other close relatives choosing to stay out of it entirely. That's not a minor detail. That's the family itself disagreeing on whether this version of the story should exist the way it does. Whatever side of the critical debate you land on, there's one thing almost nobody disputes: the lead performance. Jaafar Jackson, Michael's real-life nephew and the son of Jermaine Jackson, plays Michael in what is his first acting role of any kind. Reports describe an audition process that started with him simply sending a voice recording of himself speaking as his uncle, which was apparently enough to convince producer Graham King on the spot. From there, the preparation reportedly got intense, including working directly with choreographers who performed alongside Michael Jackson decades earlier, and studying archival home footage to build the physicality and voice. Recent coverage has even noted that at 29 years old, Jaafar is now the first debut lead actor in history to headline a billion-dollar film. That's a genuinely rare data point in movie history, and it's arguably the strongest argument in favor of this film, regardless of how you feel about what got left out of the story. Zoom out, and Michael is not really an outlier. It's the latest entry in a very consistent Hollywood formula. Bohemian Rhapsody softened a lot of the more difficult chapters of Freddie Mercury's life. Elvis leaned away from the harder years of Presley's decline. Back to Black, the Amy Winehouse film, was criticized for smoothing a genuinely tragic story into something more comfortable to watch. The pattern is consistent enough that it's basically become the unofficial business model of the modern music biopic. Build the film around the songs, the concerts, and the highlight real moments, and treat the harder chapters as optional. Audiences, it turns out, tend to show up for the sing-along version far more reliably than the fully accurate one. Michael, at $1 billion and counting, might be the single clearest proof of that formula working at scale. Lionsgate has already confirmed a sequel is in active development, and this is where things get genuinely complicated, because a sequel would presumably need to deal with exactly the material this first film was legally forced to cut. Producer Graham King has previously said a follow-up film would likely focus on later albums like Dangerous and Invincible, along with the Neverland era itself, rather than centering directly on the accusations. Whether that approach holds up once cameras start rolling again, especially with the Robson and Safechuck trial reportedly proceeding later this year, is an open question nobody in Hollywood has fully answered yet. Here's where I land on this. Michael isn't a poorly made film. The choreography, the box office, the lead performance, none of that is really in dispute. What's actually interesting is that the ending audiences saw wasn't a calm, creative decision made in a writer's room. It was a legal scramble, forced by a decades-old contract clause that almost got missed entirely. The film that made $1 billion is, in a very real sense, an accident of good lawyering under a tight deadline, not a carefully planned celebration. Whether a future sequel finally deals with the harder chapters of this story, or continues avoiding them the way this one legally had to, is going to say a lot about how Hollywood plans to keep telling this story going forward. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Should a biopic be required to tell the whole story? Or is it allowed to focus on the music? Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.